Hi, my name is Sridhar Rangan. I'm the Festival Director of KASHISH Pride Film Festival, which is having its online edition from August 15 to September 15. And this is the second week we are having a beautiful run at the online film festival. And today we are going to be talking to the producers and directors of the film Sally. Sally with an exclamation mark. We'll ask why. Okay, talking to Deborah Alice Craig, who is a director and producer. Deborah is an award-winning documentary director and producer whose films use compelling personal stories to raise awareness about the challenges and strengths of underrepresented communities. Her work has played at LGBTQ plus women's and documentary film festivals in the US and internationally. Deborah shot A Great Ride, a 33-minute documentary about lesbians and aging, premiered at the Frameline LGBTQ Film Festival in San Francisco in 2018. Was picked up for distribution by Frameline, was screened at over 50 film festivals across the globe, and has won multiple awards. Deborah has a BA in history from Columbia University, did undergraduate work in photography at California's College of the Arts, and has Master of Public Health from San Francisco State University, where she currently teaches in the Public Health Department. I love the city, San Francisco. Okay, Jörg Fockele, producer. Jörg is an award-winning filmmaker with a career spanning over 25 years. He has written and directed over 10 short films, 4 feature documentaries, and numerous music videos and PSAs. Ooh. Of the awards and distinctions Jörg has received, the most important ones are retrospectives at the Goethe Institute in New York City, San Francisco, Chicago, and Mexico City. 2 Emmys, wow. And a special prize from the International Film Festival in Berlin. Awesome. His latest project is a short documentary about New York City artist Mel Odom. In addition, Jörg is a critically acclaimed television producer of award-winning shows such as Bravo's Queer Eye, I didn't know that, wow, ABC's Wife Swap, and Sundance Channel's Big Ideas for a Small Planet, and AMC's Small Town Security. Jörg is the owner of Electric Media Lab, a production company in San Francisco, CA, that produces video focusing on social justice issues. So I'm going to read a little bit about what Sally is all about. On the surface, the documentary is about Sally Gearharty, an iconoclastic radical lesbian who lived life on her own terms and with powerful presence, practically a focus of the screen. However, the film goes beyond being the straightforward biography of a quote-unquote hidden figure, deserving more recognition. It also studies social movements where leaders won't exist without the equally resolute behind-the-scenes compatriots. And it explores the complex nature of biography itself. Can we even ever recount the chronicle of a single heroic person? Are all our stories just imperfect windows into certain times and places? And can these histories be placed in tiny boxes, or are all life icons beautiful and sometimes mysterious kaleidoscopes from multiple different perspectives that don't always come together into a neatly unified whole? That's a very, very interesting synopsis. We're going to find out more about the film when we chat up with the producers and directors. And to moderate this discussion is our beautiful actress, Mona Ambegaonkar, who is an award-winning actress. We have been knowing each other for the last 30 years. Mona and we have been working together. Pleased to introduce Mona Ambegaonkar as an award-winning actress practicing her craft of stage, television, and cinema. She began as an assistant director and editor of the first sitcom on Indian TV. She then became chief AD of the first Indian film that created in-camera effects and CGI. Wow. She stepped in front of the camera and was a brand ambassador of Rexona soap for Southeast Asia for 3 years. She continued modeling and went on to star in several TV projects and feature films and plays. She has expanded her scope of work and uses her performing arts skills for outreach and sensitization work for the oldest community-based LGBTQI in India and has been doing so for over 13 years now. Recently, she used her experience as a voiceover artist to direct the English language dubbing of a popular program of a leading streaming service. She is very active on several platforms, advocating for human rights and animal rights. She is an actress, activist, and an adventurer. Wow. What distinguished people we have on this panel. All 3 are brilliant people. I can't even believe how we are so lucky to get all the 3 of you together. So over to Mona. But before that, I want to ask why the exclamation after Sally?
I'd like to do that too.
Sally is her personality just leaps off the screen, and so she deserves that exclamation point. And in fact, when I first met her, she was already in her 80s, and still she was running around. She lived in the woods. Me and the camera woman were running to keep up with her. There's a scene at the beginning of the film where she kicks out the car door. She did that unprompted and almost knocked over the camera, and the camera woman came inches close, and we're like, whoa, that was close. And then we promptly set up the camera again to make sure it wouldn't get hit and had her do that again. That was her approach to life, to live it with full, even in her 80s when I met her, to live with full energy, with full spirit of adventure. So that exclamation point just seemed natural.
Thank you, Deborah. And over to Mona to moderate the further questions. Thank you.
So I heard from Sridhar earlier when he was briefing me that a short film about Sally was also screened at one of the earlier Kashish film festivals.
So, oh, excuse me. Yeah, keep going.
No, go on, please.
Okay, so this film, Sally, is a feature-length documentary that grew out of a previous short film. And that short film was called A Great Ride. It screened in Kashish, I think maybe 2019. And it was about Sally was in that film, but she wasn't the only character in that film. There were about a half a dozen women in that film. And that was a film that looked at lesbians and aging and how women were aging, what were their challenges, what were their strengths. And I met Sally through that process. And many people who saw that film or saw the film in process they said several things. One, they said, oh my God, that's Sally Gearharty. She's amazing. Or they said, I have no idea who this person is, but she's amazing. I want to know more. And then Jörg, I knew Jörg at the time, and Ondine was editing the short film, and they were both telling me we have to make a film about Sally and just focus on her, and not just at the end of her life, but the whole trajectory of her life. And also when we were working on that short, A Great Ride, the more we learned about Sally, the more we realized not only was she a character and charismatic and brilliant and funny, but that she had been very, very important at a certain period of time. And then the other thing was that she was getting older, having some health issues, et cetera. So we thought we had a sense both that this is an important person, an engaging person we should make a film about, and also a little bit of a sense of urgency. If this is going to happen, we should do it now.
Yeah, because of her advancing years and
Exactly.
etc. So for me, the natural question is, I didn't know about Sally until I saw the film. All right, I confess, I had no idea. I hadn't seen The Great Ride. I hadn't seen Sally exclamation mark before. She impacted me, and not because she's lesbian, but because she's a woman. And for the first time, I heard the term separatism in terms of gender. I've always heard of that word in terms of territories, as in terms of countries. People want to separate from a country they have been, earmarked into. I never thought of people being separate from each other, because not in terms of gender, because caste is a real thing in India, and there is caste separatism, which is very real and very powerful, and rising up now. So separatism, is that being considered even now? Have you met through your journey with taking Sally to so many people around the world that separatism is something that women consider even now?
That's a great question. Jörg, do you want me to field this one and then you could chime in? So separatism, it's so interesting that you mentioned separatism as relates to caste or as relates to territory. And some of the territorial separation might relate to caste or to religion. So separatism was something that was specific to the lesbian community at a time when Sally was coming out. I mean, there are many forms of separatism. And I think in some ways, separatism is a reaction of oppressed communities, of having a need, and maybe a more contemporary word for it that, in my experience, younger people use as a safe space.
Yes.
Is I am different. I experience oppression. I need a place where I can be safe, where I can be myself, where I can remove myself from experiencing discrimination, feeling othered, or even feeling endangered. And so lesbian separatism in the 70s and ongoing was women who was for women and for it was both about gender and about sexual orientation, a place to carve out a space for themselves to come into their own. And that is true. What's interesting for me was that when we would interview different people about the film, it would mean different things to different people. Okay. So I came out young, but I never was interested in separatism. I was always very engaged in a mixed world of gay men and women, or straight men and women, because of my interest in music and the arts. So I came to understand in the film about Sally how critical separatism was to certain women at a certain point in time to be able to liberate themselves. And that maybe I didn't need separatism because they had come along and created a movement where I could feel more free to be myself without needing to create a separate community. Now, separatism to me is very interesting and very problematic because it's not completely possible. And first and second of all, it also means that women, it became very complicated and dramatic in some ways. So, for example, you even see that in the film, as there's problems, there's tension within the communities. Well, there are women who have children, and there are women who have children who are boys. So how does that work out? So I was, and we, Jörg and I and Ondine, were never interested in romanticizing separatism. We were always interested in understanding it as something that was necessary and helpful at a certain point in time and also had problems. And also understanding it in a broader context. So, for example, we had women of color we interviewed for the film, and some of them said, well, I didn't want to separate from the men. For example, Jewel Gomez says, I didn't want to separate from the men in my community because I needed to be in my community of people of color.
I understand that completely. If you
Yeah.
study African American history, you understand that their entire history is about being separated from their families, from their culture, from the country, from their people who speak the same language. They were bred like animals and then separated from their children like animals, like how we breed dogs and then sell them, etc., that sort of thing. So for them to then find the freedom to be able to hold their families together, that be very, very important. I certainly understand that. What is your point of view on this order?
Well, I think, Deborah summarized it very well, that we wanted to both look at how important it was for women at a certain time to make this decision, not being separated by someone else, but making that decision. We need this space for ourselves. I think that's a very important point to make here. And at the same time, the pitfalls of that and the problems that came with that, even within the movement, because a lot of the women at the time did not agree with that. I think what I'd like to add is that we also spoke to some gay men who said that they were very inspired by seeing women doing that. Even though they were separated by the women, they were not invited into the spaces the women created, but they said that looking at the women doing this as gay men made them realize that they had a desire to do something similar. And Jewel Gomez, the writer who Deborah just quoted, also says in the film that she needed those spaces, that women really needed a space where they could come together, figure out who they were, gather their strengths, and then face the outside world. This is along the lines of what Deborah just said about like ostracized groups. And that applied to gay men, even gay white men at the time, that they felt we need our own space. And for some here in San Francisco, the Castro kind of became that kind of space, almost in a geographical sense. And they wanted to get together, figure out amongst themselves, feel safe, not being othered, being supported by others, to then be able to go out into the community. I think for most separatists, not all, but most, this was never meant to be a permanent thing. This was supposed to be a phase to gather strengths, understand certain things about themselves, have a backing, and then go out into the greater community. Because, like Deborah said, at the end of the day, complete separatism is not possible, even less so now than it ever was. But at a certain time and in certain phases of a movement, it does make sense to give them an opportunity to have a safe space. That's probably a nicer way to put it, to find out who they are and then to move forward and fight the battles they have to fight.
I totally agree, because I don't think separatism can be a permanent condition. It is impossible biologically also for it. If you want the species to propagate, it's not going to be possible. At some point, even if it comes out of a test tube, you're going to need semen, right? So, well, there is that.
Well, it's interesting. Sally was interested in many, many things. And one thing that she was interested in, whether or not we could auto-generate without semen.
Oh, right.
Because she was curious about everything. I think it is, for many people, it was a phase that they needed. But there was also a certain amount, in many movements that are struggling to sort of free themselves from their chains. For want of it's a little bit of a harsh word, but there's a level of dogmatism. So I think there was a certain amount of dogmatism or extremism within some of the separatist communities. And then Sally was sometimes accused of being not separatist enough, or of being too separatist. And then
change, sorry to interrupt, but any kind of change comes with some amount of violence of some sort, some kind of
upheaval,
upheaval. That is perhaps the right word. Something has to break for something else to take its place. Something has to move so that something else may come in its place. So that movement, that shift is necessary, and for that, people find different ways of doing it, right? Some people will go to an extreme. Other people will depend on dialogue. Some people will say, no, I just need the silence and the quiet moment. Please, everybody leave right now. So that happens to everybody. So I think that one does understand that. I think it would be easy to understand that she could say, I'm so furious, and then say, oh, but we must be nonviolent,
Yes.
And it's so Gandhian. That is so Gandhi, because he would go unto these fast unto deaths, which is, fasting unto death is a violent act,
Yeah.
It really is. But he would never raise his hand on anybody, He would not even raise his voice at anybody. So yeah, I completely understand. I want to ask you
also soften. I just wanted to quickly say it's softened. So they were young. There's the youthful energy of changing the world. We need that. And that goes along sometimes with that unwillingness to compromise. And then I used to it's a joke that's somewhat true, is that the women would say, no men on the land ever. And then 5-10 years later, well, when men on the lands once a month to help us fix the plumbing, and then another 10 years later, well, no man on the land except for my grandson, And so a lot of those positions, were very adamant and then softened over time because of life experience and just because of people aging and hopefully gaining a little bit of softness and wisdom, if we're lucky when we.
Because you've been so mainstream in a lot of your work, I want to ask you, as a producer, what is your position on this film becoming a commercial release? Is that likely to ever happen? Will it sort of stream on Netflix maybe, or, be more easily accessible to people who don't speak the English, being dubbed in other languages or have subtitles in other languages, and be commercially available, also making money for you guys? I mean, producers want to make money, I would imagine. I can see Sridhar going.
Well, the reality is that when we embarked on this journey, we never expected to make any money. If anything, we expected to pay for it, because the reality for most of us, filmmakers who work with low budgets or no budgets is that we're lucky if we get some grants that tie us over and make things possible. But for us to make money, it's a handful of filmmakers in the United States, I think, that we know that can live off of that. So for us, being amongst the hundreds, if not thousands of indie filmmakers who are doing this as a side gig, and both Deborah and I and Ondine, our editor, we all had to work full time on the side to support ourselves. It was always clear that if we just ended up not in the red, it would be a big accomplishment. And we've managed that. We are now at a point finally where we are the money that we put into this film, we got back. We have a distribution deal with Women Make Movies, which is, it's not like Warner Brothers, but in the indie world, they are a very accomplished and very well-known entity. So we're very happy about that. We had multiple offers. We had 3 or 4 different companies that approached us about representing the film. Over a year after the premiere of the film, we premiered at Frameline, the largest and oldest LGBT film festival here in the United States in San Francisco. That was in June of 2024, and it is now August 25. So it's like 14 months later. The invitations to festivals are still coming in. Ironically, if anything, they seem to be coming more in because festivals look at each other's programs and then pull films from there. And there's also an interest in renting the film or purchasing the film. So to answer your question, I don't know that this is ever going to go mainstream. However, I think the mainstream has also shifted. One of the reasons that these LGBT film festivals started, I don't know about KASHISH, but certainly here in the United States, was because Frameline, perfect example, 50-year anniversary next year. They started in the 1970s when there were simply no films that were being made and or visible at the time. Now, fast forward 50 years later, here in the United States, you go to any streaming service and you will see very outrageous films sometimes, very sexual films around gender and sexuality, including gay relationships and lesbian relationships. So I would not be surprised if the film ended up on one of those streamers. I've certainly seen stuff that is more daring, I want to say, or more out there than ours, even though we have a lot of boobs and we have a couple of full frontal nudity shots that might, get us in trouble. But I think overall, I could see this film being shown on a more mainstream platform. I think in part, because the mainstream has shifted. And second, for us, it was always an interest not just to make a film about Sally Gearharty and to bring her back into the mainstream or into queer history because we felt she deserved it and she had been shortchanged. But we always thought that she was a great opportunity to look at social justice movements in general. And hopefully the film does that in the second act, that yes, we are focusing on her and her story, but we're also looking at all the women that fought by her side, that propped her up, that turned her into the Sally Gearharty she ended up being, that very political, very outspoken person, because she didn't start out as that. And she would have never gotten there without a lot of other women that are even less known than Sally is in mainstream history, but that propped her up. And we believe that that is true for any social justice movement. So by including that story in the film, we hope that there is a way for other people to approach this who might not be interested in the story of a lesbian separatist who was very active in the late 70s, but in someone who led a social justice movement at some point in time, and looking at how did that person get there, who were the people who propped her up, and who were the people who did the work alongside this one person that we remember now that did a lot of the work that the person in the front was not necessarily doing.
But you don't have anybody saying that about Harvey Milk. Nobody talks about the men who propped him up,
Well, that's the thing.
I find in that, sorry to interrupt you, I find it very interesting that the women will point this out, that so many women propped up a Sally, but not anybody will point out, so many people propped up a Harvey Milk. And one of those people was also Sally. And so for her to be invisibilized from that revolutionary history, that change-making history, is to me, I know you have touched on it in your film, but amongst the community itself, did they ever feel that they must reach out to somebody? Because Milk, as the mainstream film that it was, and we've seen it here in India, and not at film festivals, but in theaters, it was commercially released. We bought tickets and saw the film. for us, that becomes the rendition of history for, for popular consumption. And from that, one of the most important elements, one person has been removed, literally. So as independent filmmakers, how do you address something like that personally, on a personal level? How did that impact, let's say, the editing of the film? How did that impact the writing of the film? The actual creative work on a film about a woman who has been literally removed from the history of revolution, for the rainbow community.
Maybe I'll jump in quickly and then Jörg, you can follow up. So I think one of our first aims in making with a film was to restore Sally to her rightful place in the pantheon, or whatever you want to call it, of LGBTQ history. At a certain point in time, she was very important and did many, many things. She fought alongside Harvey Milk, and successfully defeated the Briggs Initiative, and she led that charge. She helped co-found one of the first women's studies programs in the whole country. She wrote fantasy novels that were incredibly influential to lesbians and gay women and gay men at a certain point, that envisioned a more utopian future. So we did want to make sure to restore her and have people know about her importance and her accomplishments. And that's the first part of the film, is she was important in this movement, she was important in that movement. We did not want to make the mistake of the Milk film and to put her up on a pedestal. And so the second part of the film is to clearly show, that she was surrounded by these other brilliant, accomplished women who helped in those struggles and helped make her who she was. And B, that she was not a perfect person. And so we really, really looked to the Milk film for, like, okay, what did they leave out? So we want to put that in. But also, we wanted to do a more collective approach to filmmaking, sort of more of a quilt-like approach, or a communal storytelling approach to telling the story. It was not just the story of Sally, a story of a movement, the story of the other women who helped make her who she was. So she was not just a leader, but was also a creation of that movement. So that was really at the forefront of our mind. The other thing that's interesting to me is, and I try to always remember to say this, is that, so the Milk film is the Hollywood version of Harvey Milk's story and the story of the gay movement of that time. But there are documentaries, in particular, Rob Epstein's documentary, The Times of Harvey Milk, that interviewed Sally, that Sally and many other women are included in the story. So it ends up being, again, like everything. And in the Sally film, the more we did it, the more we realized nothing is simple. With Sally, there's never one answer. She's a lesbian separatist tree hugger who eats bacon and junk food, right? Which makes it all the more
Harvey
interesting.
Milk. For a separatist, she was right at the heart of that gay movement.
And she was a separatist, and she loved men. She always had men in her life. And so we never wanted to oversimplify. We didn't want to put her up on a pedestal. We didn't want to make her a perfect person. We didn't want to make her seem like she just bloomed full-formed out of nowhere. She actually grew up in a small conservative town in the church. It was so important for us to show not just her at the height of her radicalism and activism, but where she came from and what the journey she made to get there.
Mona, and if I may add, kind of what I heard from your question was kind of the concern that when we look at these films that celebrate male social justice figures, that they are being put on this pedestal and they're being shown as these brilliant men, while we made a film about this woman kind of saying she was great, but also she wouldn't have been anything without these other women, kind of in a way, kind of minimizing her. That's kind of what I heard a little bit. And I think, the reality is that we run that risk. Absolutely. Because we're doing something that these other biographies, or at least the Hollywood versions of these biographies of these men, Martin Luther King, another example, that they don't necessarily do. But at the same time, if you listen closely to the film, there is a point when these three women that we call them our oracles, that were close friends with Sally from the very, very early days on, when they say Sally would have been nothing without this and this and this. And Deborah said, but don't you think it's important to have that we have these figures in the front? And they say, yes, absolutely. But, and then they list all these other things that we have to consider. So I think it is something that we were aware of. But at the same time, if you want to break that mold of looking at history and historical figures and social justice movements only through that lens which we call it the patriarchal lens, where you have to have that big hero that comes in to like save the day, Superman. If we want to break that mold, we got to do it in a different way, and that's what we tried. And by having at the same time having that moment where you hear Deborah's voice off camera, we're hoping that we're breaking that and we're showing the people that we're kind of trying to do it both ways. But short answer to your question is, that is a risk that we are running by making the film the way we have. Absolutely.
Because men are never ashamed of, they don't feel shy of putting on the mantle of the hero and, doing their thing. But women will always say, oh, hang on a minute, there was also that. There was also something else. And that is very interesting in terms of the gender perspective as well for me. So as I observe, because I observe characters or people with from the point of view of, what if I were to play this person? What would this person's psychology be? What would be the kind of friends he or she will have? So what would those friends say into this person's ears, and how would he or she react to that? So if Sally, because there is this wonderful gathering of all the women, and they are talking about their collective movement and how they left things to come and live on this land, and how they are all part of it and everything. And a lot of them are speaking the truth to her face. They are not pulling punches. They are not being polite to her for the sake of, they're being kind to her. They laugh about it, but they are being friends, true friends, as in telling her the truth, which was very, very important for me. I have another question. So I was going through the cast and credit sort of list, and I asked Sridhar this as well. I said, was it a conscious decision that people who worked on the community on the film would belong to the community? Was that a conscious decision? Did that come about organically? Because I have been a part of a lot of LGBT themed projects, but not everybody was from the community. So a lot of the times my outreach work also included telling them that, no, hang on, this community exists, it's not unnatural, it is there, and actually sit them down and, do all of that, because the makeup man would come along and say, he would say in Hindi or whatever, well, isn't that, do they do that? I mean, like, really? I mean, that guy is not falling off his heels, and it was like, you have to say, well, heels, yeah, in the medieval times, people wore heels in the West. Men wore heels, and of course, they don't know anything about that because, all of that. But so for me, it was very interesting to see that most of the credits that I read, they were all community. Was that an organic thing, or was that a conscious decision?
Can I jump in, Jörg? And yeah. So yes. So it very interesting for me. So I grew up not only not a separatist, but sort of not understanding separatism and not quite believing in it. I grew up playing music and things with mixed groups. In this case, it was a very conscious decision to have women, most of whom identified as lesbians, on crew. Not for political reasons or anything, but because for the comfort of the women we were interviewing, who were, Sally was a flirt until she was 90, okay, and enjoyed being surrounded by women and beautiful women, and so it was to put her and many of her friends also feel comfortable and at ease and pleasant, pleased and surprised to be. And so Sally would always love that our sound woman Loretta would put the mic on her and have to drop it down her shirt, and so of course Sally loved that. So really it was a couple of reasons. One is to show, look, yes, women and lesbians can do this, and queer people, and also to put our participants at ease. And a little bit of a side note, but also frankly, in a lot of grant applications, you really need to convince people that you are going to be, well, let's see what I'll say, not exploitive. So if you're from outside of the community, there's always the risk. And even if you're from within the community, but particularly if you're from outside of the community, what right do you have to tell the story? What connection do you have with the community? Very, very important in grant applications. So it was a conscious decision. On the other hand, it was wonderful to, for example, have Jörg, to, for example, have a composer who was a straight man, a sound person who was a straight man, to have that diversity, to have that mix of perspective, so we could know we didn't want to make a film that only appealed to lesbians over 50 or 60 or 70. We want to make sure it appealed to younger people, to straight people, to et cetera. And so, for example, we were doing the sound mix once, and I was down in LA, and within the room with two straight guys, and they were both laughing their asses off at something Sally said or did, and I was like, yes, this is good. This is it was very, if not as rewarding, if not more rewarding, to have an older woman who knew Sally be like, yes, this is my story. And so I think that and Jörg, you can tell your story of the time you met Sally if you're interested, but we were definitely navigating. I'm always interested in inclusion and working with different people, but in this particular project, it made so much sense for so many reasons to primarily work with women and primarily work with people from the queer community.
And just to add a couple of things, there was no litmus test people had to fill out whether they were queer or not. When you look at the credits, what you can see is that we have a lot of women in positions that used to traditionally be more male dominated, such as sound department, such as camera department, the tech jobs that in the past used to be primarily men. But again, we did not ask people beforehand, are you queer or not? And we know some people, I still don't know whether they were or not, and it didn't matter to us as long as they were comfortable and supportive of the project. The other thing is, and this is a very personal thing for me, is that regardless of the fact that we knew that Sally and most of the women that we interviewed would appreciate seeing women behind the camera, basically seeing the fruit of their labor, let's face it, because in the 1970s, that was impossible. But also for me personally, one of my best friends in the world was one of the first female camera assistants in Hollywood, like 25 years ago or 30 years ago. She was literally 30 years ago in Hollywood, one of a handful of women that had to fight really hard to do that job and had to be twice as good as any man because, again, as a woman, she had to prove that she could do it, something that was considered a male job. And then looking at what's happening now in this country, which is that I watch credits very carefully, that every other television show or movie, you see a female director of photography. It's a horror movie. It's an action movie. It's, the Wakanda movies, right? Black Panther movies, it's a female DP. That would have been impossible before. And to me, it's important to keep that going. It's still not the norm. I think people are still taken aback, people that are not part of the industry, to see that women are doing these things now with special effects supervisor, the supervisor of stunts, but it's happening. And I feel like we contributed to that in our own way by making sure that we hired women in these what used to be predominantly male parts of the film industry.
Yeah, I completely resonate with that. When I began in the industry as a technician, as an assistant and an editor, there were no women. On the sets of the first feature film that I did, I was the only woman in the technical crew across the board. There was the leading lady and her hairdresser, and then there was I. There was nobody in between. So I understand completely where
This was not 100 years ago, right?
I'm 59 now, so yeah. I began when I was 17, so that was a while back. I have one last question now. in the political atmosphere that is unfolding across the board in my country and in yours, how do you see your future work unfolding? Where is your filmmaking going to take you, especially about when it's the films that you make, which are activist films, really? Even the documentation that you're doing today, it is preserving history that is being overwhelmed by the mainstream, by the majoritarian narrative, by the it's kind of making people faceless, without character. It's taking the crevices out of our lived realities. It's trying to make me wrinkle less, and you wrinkle less, and your histories without the wrinkles, suddenly. How do you see your work unfolding from this point on, and what is it that you're planning for the immediate future? I'll ask Deborah to take that first, and then Jörg.
Okay. So a couple of things. One, we pushed very hard to get this film out before the election last year, because we felt that it was not only relevant to what was happening back in the 70s and 80s and the big feminist, movement and gay feminists, women's liberation and gay liberation movements then, but it feels very relevant to us right now to tell our stories and to tell the stories of how pretty much almost 50 years ago now, this group of women and men fought for the liberation of themselves and their communities. So it doesn't feel like just past history. It feels relevant in this moment right now. It's complicated, like Sally. It feels like the perfect moment for it, and a pretty horrendous moment at the same time, where women's and gay and history of African American people in this country, people of color in this country, women and gay people in this country, their history is not being ignored, but actively erased. I mean, literally actively using algorithms to search for words and then erasing those things in some ways that are so uninformed is almost comical. So, for example, the Enola Gay was the name of a plane. Gay is a woman's name. They erased that because gay it just came up in an algorithm. So it seems especially important now, not just to tell our past history, but we always think of the Sally film as hopefully also inspiration for those same battles that somehow we find ourselves having to fight those same battles all over again. I mean, we have people who are in positions of power who are actually saying, well, maybe women shouldn't have gotten the vote, and so it feels very challenging but timely, I think, for us to have this film and to find the ways. And for me, my first feature, Rude Awakening, you don't just finish it and then go to the beach. You finish it and then it's like, oh, my job is only half done. We have to get it out into the world. But it feels particularly important in these, I would say, a polite word is to say challenging times.
I think, I have like a twofold answer, Mona, for you. And it's like, one is like in terms of Sally, like Deborah said, it's more timely than ever. So we're happy that it's available now. And we're hoping that through Women Make Movies, that the film will still reach an audience. Because while this stuff is happening, while they're trying to erase the wrinkles, which is us, I like your analogy there.
Because my wrinkles are my lived history, aren't they?
I know,
They're
exactly.
a documentation of my life having been led.
Yes.
Yeah.
At the same time, there is a hunger and a need for the film. So, there's these two contradicting powers that are fighting each other right now. While the government may not want us and may not want this film and may not support it, the grants that we received, some of them actually at this point have been rescinded, are not going out to films like ours anymore. But at the same time, there are communities that are hungry for this kind of content more than ever. So I think in terms of Sally's shelf life, It may not go the mainstream route. We may not get invited to the White House anymore for any events with our film. But at the same time, we think that the festivals are certainly proof of that, that we've gotten so many festivals invitations. We've had over 70 so far. We've won 12 awards with the film. There is a hunger for this. People want to see this, and we just got to find our ways that are outside of what has become mainstream, I want to say, over the course of the past 20 years or so for queer folks. We have to find ways how to get out of that and still reach our audience. On like moving forward, you asked about, how do we see like the future of this? I am working on my next project, which is a short documentary about an artist in New York. And part of the reason I took it on, although I have to say, after 7 years of working on Sally for free, again, as indie filmmakers, that's the reality, I was kind of tired. But this one, because of the fact that the subject of the film is a fairly well-known artist who has like 30,000 followers on Instagram or TikTok or something, we hope that there's a built-in audience that will support the filmmaking. We're doing a short film on purpose because we're hoping that it's easier and faster to produce. Because I know basically everything that I've done under my own company or from myself, everything is basically DEI related. The television work I did was more mainstream. You alluded to that earlier, but my own films, you can summarize every single film I've done. I just looked at it over the course of the past 30 years under DEI, which means that right now the grants that I've received in the past, I can forget about that. So it is sad, but it is definitely true that the politics in this country are already trickling down and are impacting, at least in my specific case, the decisions I make on what films to make and what not. This is still a film about a queer artist, so that aspect is still there. But I definitely feel like my choices of what to make a film about have been impacted by the political climate, which I hate to admit because that's exactly what they want. That's exactly what they want to do.
Unfortunately, but we will be pushing back.
Yeah. If I have one moment, one is I want to make sure people understood what DEI is, which is it's an acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion, which just to put it mildly, our current administration is adamantly opposed to, which what it really means is uniformity, inequity, and exclusion, which really means anybody who's not a cis, straight, white man should not be funded or of interest or anything like that.
And I have seen the impact of this decision by your White House here in India, because a company like Google, which would annually invite me to come into their office spaces and conduct, so I perform a play and then we do a Q&A, and then there's this whole thing where we present a work or do conduct workshops with them and sensitize them to the variety of peoples that they are bound to meet in their lives, and how workspace inclusion is so important for their own personal development, has completely stopped.
Yeah.
There was a time in India where I would go into MNCs, multinational companies, and they would make me sign a non-disclosure agreement. We fought that and won it. And now whenever we used to go and sensitize until last year, we didn't have to sign DNAs, and we didn't non-disclosure agreements, and we didn't have to worry about the press getting hold of it. And it was all, in fact, they liked the fact that I'm going in there to do this DEI workshops with them, being in the press, because that gave them some profile. Now suddenly we are back to the dark ages, and so what has happened in America has impacted us here in India in a real way, in terms of even hiring people in these large multinational companies that Indian workforces do depend on. I mean, we cannot.
The one last, if I may, just very quickly, one last thing I want to say about Sally is that we hope in this age of polarization, division, othering, hatred, we hope, Sally could be so outrageous. And she did it on purpose to rile people up. I mean, she would say things like, we should reduce men to 10% of the population. And I can't wait for the demise of the church so we can begin to practice the gospel. but she never, ever, that I could see, and I hope I'm not romanticizing, said anything in a spirit of hatred.
Mm.
And everything that she did, no matter how radical, was said in a spirit of love, a spirit of, curiosity, a spirit. And we hope we also show in the film that she was so interested in connecting with everybody, in particular, interested in connecting with people who are different from her. So
I think
that radicalism,
she said a lot of outrageous things also as a means of pulling your leg. Just to find out what you think about it, just to get you to open up, I think, because I've watched the film twice, and I was like, she's doing this because she wants to know what you think, and that was so
She's poking the bear.
Yeah. That was so
but always in a spirit of humanity, of compassion, of this incredible desire to connect with other people. And we need that, because if we don't have that, if we don't find a way to regain that, we are lost.
Yes. Thank you for making this film, and thank you for being here with us. Sorry, what were you saying?
I was just going to say one thing, I don't want to end this conversation without saying that we are in dark times right now. There's no doubt about it. And it's important that we face that and that we name it and that we fight it. But we hope that our film, if nothing else, shows people that we've been here before. The fights they were fighting almost exactly 50 years ago were verbatim. They were trying to remove gay and lesbian teachers from public schools in California. That's when Sally got involved with Harvey Milk. We are having almost the exact conversations now about protecting the children that are being, that are being groomed by queer people. It's the exact conversation. It's the same playbook. They're trying to erase us from libraries, etc. We've been through this before. It is scary, let's face it, and we gotta name it, but at the same time, we must not despair. We've been through this before, we've fought it before, we've come out on the other side. At this point, it's still legal for same-sex couples in the United States to get married. So that's we'll see how much longer, but still. But so there's been progress, is my point. And we go through these cyclical things, so if you listen to this or you watch the movie, do not despair. We make these movies to give people hope and continue the fight.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sally would not despair.
No,
she would leap up on a soapbox.
She would and kick that car door open. She would do that. Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mona, for hosting and moderating this wonderful conversation, and so bringing out all the important aspects of the film and the terms and conditions which were prevailing at that point of time. And today, of course, like we are, again, as we already discussed, reaching darker times again. Even Kashish suffered it because like a lot of the DI funding, which Kashish banks upon, dried up. Some of the sponsors stayed back with us, of course, but we lost many sponsors. And but we hope to renew again, like next year. The phoenix will rise again from the ashes, as we always. Thank you, Deborah and Jörg, for
this year. Kashish fought a huge financial battle, and kudos to Sridhar and Sagar. Sagar is his partner, for keeping this festival alive. They are just this two-man army. I mean, just by themselves.
No, all of you are there with us, and filmmakers are supporting us. That's the basic thing. Filmmakers are giving their films to watch at the in-person festival and online. So thank you for Deborah and Jörg for making it, and the entire team of Sally for facilitating that. Thank you so much. And we still have 2 more weeks of Kashish still happening. So please continue to watch and engage with all the films which are showing in India and outside India. Please do support Kashish by watching and telling your friends to watch the films. And keep seeing the Q&As. We are engaging with most of the filmmakers whose films are showing. I think almost 90% of the filmmakers are part of the Q&A. So please do join in and continue to support Kashish. Thank you so much.